It's the hour. It's the hour. Welcome to day 2 of the Heathen Women United Conference. Can I remind you to turn your microphones off if you're not the speaker, that we are recording. So if you don't want to be seen, feel free to turn your videos off. And I have great pleasure in introducing the first speaker of today, Dr. Rune Rasmussen. Hopefully I've said that correctly. Now, some of you will know Rune very well from his work with Nordic animism, and hopefully have heard him speak before. He was fantastic at last year's conference. So he's a historian of religion, educated at the universities of Uppsala and Copenhagen. He's lived in many countries, done field work in a number of contemporary religions, primarily Afro descent ones. And since childhood has had Nordic religion as a strong field of interest. And today he's currently working on applying contemporary developments in anthropology to rethink the way we address Nordic religion, both in terms of scholarship, but also as a reservoir of cultural knowledge for the environmental activism and sustainability sensitization. That was a mouthful for me. And today he's going to be talking to us about the year of Aun, which is absolutely fascinating. So without further ado, I will hand over to Rune. Rune, you should be able to just share your screen whenever you wish to.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me just make sure that you can hear me. Can you hear this? Cool. And then I'm just going to take this one off so you can hopefully still hear me. Yeah, and thanks so much for the great honor of presenting here again this year. I'm really happy about it, and I'm just going to put on my thing here. Cool. Yeah, in a medieval Viking age myth, King Aun the Old of Sweden, he murdered his own sons. He sacrificed them to Odin in order to go on living. He sacrificed one every 8 years, and this rather atrocious behavior then probably came to be a model for the falling out and realignment of the cycles of the sun and the moon, which probably defined the dates of those octennial celebrations. Oh, wait a second, I just need to, these ones, where pre-Christian heathens gathered and performed these grand celebration feasts every 8 years in their regional centers, such as in Leida in Zealand and in Uppsala in central Sweden. And Vikings, then being Vikings, decided to actually ritually mirror King Aun's rather atrocious behavior with their own rather atrocious human sacrifices at those octennial celebrations that King Aun's mythic infanticide sort of mapped out on time, right? Now, what relevance in all conceivable worlds, what relevance can possibly this complex of rather gruesome Iron Age behavior have to sane contemporary people? What relevance is there in these grand octennial celebrations that Scandinavians, heathens, sort of celebrated before Christianity became normative in the region? Well, I actually think it has quite a bit of very strong contemporary relevance. In fact, surprisingly relevant. I wasn't aware of how relevant it was when at some point this last year, well, the theory had been brewing for some time, but I kind of introduced to some people a theory of exactly how to create a lunisolar criterion for dating these octennial celebrations based on the confluence of a new moon and the winter solstice. And it's a little bit funky to explain, but I'm doing this on my YouTube channel, so you can check it out there. Now, I checked out this theory that I have with people that are wiser than myself, such as Mathias Nordvik and Joshua Root and Marie-Elisette Jacobsen and others. And most people actually liked my theory quite a lot and said that it really made sense. So then we kind of got together sort of a group of contemporary voices from the sort of Norsophiles and networks online to sort of say, yeah, okay, this is a pretty good theory. So now we are declaring this year of celebration, the year of our 2023, when this confluence of the new moon and the winter solstice happens. Again, there were also other options that we could have chosen from, but we say, okay, let's go with 2023 when it happens. And you can go and see all that. And now I'm putting a little link in there. You can see me talking about that on my list, on this playlist, on the Hour Year that I have on my cat channel. Then I went on to start sort of dialoguing with people about what the flip to do then, because one thing is that we know that this is a time to do. Another thing is that we know that people in the Viking Age did something and they sacrificed a hell of a lot of people. But what do you do with that today? And it's actually a rather difficult question. So I've been sort of trying to create dialogues about it and sort of speak with people about it. And also because I kind of feel that this sort of thing probably emerges in the best way from sort of communal processes of people talking to each other, rather than just one uber nerd who was sitting in his man cave and thinking up some stuff, So, and besides Matthias and Josh that I already mentioned here, and Maria Jakobsen and others, I spoke to all kinds of actually very different people, such as the Aboriginal Australian thinker, philosopher, Tyson Junkerporter, and Johan Heck from Amon Amarth, actually, that and his wife that I've been also talking to about this stuff. I don't know, maybe I just feel home with together with heterosexual shit kickers with long beards and long hair. I think that perhaps there's something I need to work on there. Anyway, but this is also why I really want to sort of try to create dialogues and have people sort of think with it and talk about this stuff, because it isn't actually really clear what's exactly supposed to happen about it, right? And I really hope that also here now that we'll have a time to sort of exchange and talk a little bit about it, rather than just me basking in the glow of my own voice. Though admittedly, I do enjoy the shit out of that, but it's not always the creative thing to do. Cool. So I want to just talk a little bit about how we can approach this ancient myth in order to understand it, so we can perhaps get started on creating contemporary theory, contemporary ceremony about it. Right. So what does the myth mean? Right. Now, I think that the Aun story is primarily a story about break of kinship. And that, I think, is a general theme in Nordic animists' knowledge, most iconically from the Ragnarok myth, Höður killing Baldur, that fratricide that makes the whole interconnectedness of the world sort of unravel and come apart. The ash burns and everything descends into conflict. But also you also see it in folklore, where you find these breaks on relations that are either recovered through some arduous trial or not recovered, and then results in collapse and madness. Now, King Aun, he kills his own seeds, his own descendants, and ends up and lives on and lives on and ends up completely paralyzed, where he's eating out of a horn, like a medieval baby bottle, really. And that is, in fact, very much not an ideal behavior, even of an Iron Age kingship, where human sacrifices was something that was a common practice. It is definitely not an ideal behavior of an Iron Age king to kill his own descendants. And that is also what Tyson Junkerporter immediately saw when in my dialogue with him, and that is that this is a cautionary tale, right? And the pre-Christian sacrificial practice then seems to be mirroring that in sort of perhaps to make up for that cosmic break of kinship that myth is talking about. And how does that apply today? I mean, we don't sacrifice humans. Well, we actually kind of do, when children are gone down in some American school somewhere, then is that a human sacrifice to perhaps the principle of freedom? And is there some element of sacralization of their death taking place in public eulogies and these kind of things? Probably, but we don't like throw blondes with bullet bras into volcanoes and hang thralls in groves and all that stuff. And importantly, we don't want to do that, right? So first, the myth certainly makes a lot of sense today, but how does it speak to us, and how does it make sense to build or respond? And I'm totally not finished understanding this, as I've mentioned, but I'd like to throw out some thoughts about that has sort of emerged in these different dialogues that I've been having. How do we today respond to the proximity of the Ragnarok? These worms that are gnawing at the roots of the Yggdrasil, this constant or perhaps cyclically growing threat or cyclically returning threat against the animist interconnectedness of a cosmos, right? We live today, I think, in a relational crisis, not only in our way of apocalyptically extractive consumption, which is driving that ongoing omnicide, which is pressing us towards the biggest collapse in the history of life for 66 million years. But it's also about stuff like the way that we are getting encased in mirror cabinets, which creates polarization. This is a rupture of connectedness, right? So it's an aspect of that rupture of kinship, we could say. Notice, by the way, that the Ragnarok itself is also a polarization. Gods and giants, or Jötnar, they used to have all kinds of weird relations until interconnectedness crumbled, and then they started this total war, behaving more like Christian angels and demons, and that is the Ragnarok. And we have deeply pathological patterns of consumption. We produce and discard stuff at a hysteric frenzy of hatred towards the world. And we encase ourselves in this hyper availability of impulse satisfaction. Any imaginable addiction that you can possibly have, there will be an availability of having it satisfied all the time. It's that ounce baby bottle which is there all the time and which is reducing us to this sort of paralyzed state. We are Aun lying on his bed with this baby bottle while his descendants, the life of our descendants, are being sacrificed in order for us to uphold our state of synthetic consumer comfort. We are the worst imaginable ancestors. Relation is being ruptured and lost in so many ways in our time. Also, in relation to the myths that people are telling each other, myths are supposed to create relation in positive, fertile ways, but contemporary myths are often infantile parallel realities that are completely detached from reality in these unrelated narratives. So we are Aun and by the way, this thing here. No, I'm getting back. Well, yeah, I'll get back to that. And we also are Aun in our complicity with the violence against other than humans in other parts of the world, against other humans in other parts of the world, that is driven by the oligarchic economic order that we are complicit with. We are Aun in our acceptance of this gruesome and life-annihilating behavior to the whole non-human sort of ecology of beings around us. Also the beings that are becoming our food, both plants and animals and everything. We are extremely destructive and abusive to all life around us from our contemporary society. We are Aun in our loss of connectedness to the people closest to us, because our social instincts are being hacked by these synthetic systems that tend to enclose us in these algorithm-generated mirror cabinets that enhance our stupidest and basest sides and erode, for instance, political and social debates that should hold our societies together. This is all, I think, the advancing Ragnarok, the advancing loss of relatedness in our world. And I think it's very visible that we have failed to perform these ancient rites of cyclical healing for about a millennia, but everybody didn't stop. Hindus, for instance, they have these grand celebrations that they return to every, well, I can't remember if it's 12 years or something like that. And this kind of grand celebration that return with a big number of a larger number of years in between, they typically have this aspect of purifying the channels of relatedness in the world. These kinds of cyclically returning, typically pilgrimage celebrations, they are often something like that. I have to say that I also find it remarkable that I think the only statement actually about the purpose of the Nordic, pre-Christian Nordic celebration that seems to be exactly that. Tidmar of Merseburg, who describes this ritual in Leire in Zealand, he says that the ritual was supposed to align people with those who dwell beneath the earth and ensure their forgiveness for misdeeds. And of course, that sounds kind of Christian, and it could be something that he has made up, this whole forgiveness kind of thing. However, it also does sound quite a lot as stuff that typically goes on in that kind of celebration. A realignment with spirits of the earth, for instance, kind of purification. In the Christian and Jewish celebrations, the year of Jubilee, or the year of Yubal in the Jews, there are stuff like remission of sin going on. Sin is before it became a moral thing in Christianity, it was a kind of impurity or contamination that is expressed a little bit like karma, something like that. And this relational crisis is that loss of connectedness. And pre-Christian Scandinavians, they had really, really strong awareness about the potential proximity of that the world might actually be falling apart. That was something that they worried quite a lot about. And I think we need to recover that feeling, because the world is falling apart. And we do know it. There are also contemporary myths and cultural expressions that seem to either express this falling apart, express the relational crisis, or perhaps try to recover connectedness in so many different ways. And perhaps we can use some of these current myths of our time to understand Aum at a deeper level, to understand the Aum logic in our world at a deeper level, because they are contemporary explorations of this loss of connectedness and power predicated on violence, right? One example is the movie The Matrix, where totally like Aum, humanity in this Matrix mythology is reduced to this paralysis of comfort that is predicated actually on cannibalism. This is humans who are grown by these machines, and they're being fed human protein through tubes, a little bit like Aum there with his baby bottle. Another example of a contemporary myth is the QAnon. Like Aum, the QAnon mythology is a myth about how power is predicated on violence towards children. And of course, the literal QAnon narrative is comical in its manifest insanity. I mean, Hillary Clinton is not the kingpin of a global sex cannibal cult, but there's a layer of truth in there as well, which is that the power that Hillary Clinton represents, that is in a sense cannibal, eating our children, for instance, by insisting on accelerating the insane destruction of our planet. You see the healing potential in this way of using the Aum narrative and the Aum ceremony. That in fact it might be able to heal some of the most infantile and idiotic, destructive trends of our time by basically giving them what Tyson Yunkaporta calls a right story, a legitimate contemporary myth that actually speaks rightly and creates positive relational patterns about this underlying truth that is somewhere deep below these rather crazy ideas, right? So instead of also the deeply comical idea of, for instance, Donald Trump as a savior, I think that the Aum complex has a potential to perhaps teach people in that way how we are our. We are that worst imaginable ancestor eating our own children. And we should, consider how to stop doing that, I think, by the way, that this kind of healing potential is something, part of the reason that media and elites sometimes tend to reproduce imagery of North European traditional knowledge as in part dangerous and in part as infantile silliness. And I'm not saying that there isn't a deeply problematic interface between, for instance, heathendom and fascism. There is an interface. However, when the global media chooses this clownish figure here as an exotifying image of, hold on to something, an evangelist revival movement. Global media chose that as the icon of an evangelist revival movement. Then it just seems to me that the global media just loves this interface between North European traditional religiosity and deplorable stuff a little bit too much. There were probably other images available, but this is a bit of a sidetrack. But there are very strong tendencies in our time, I think, to reproduce this cultural marginalization of North European traditional knowledge, which is sort of it's an other side to the fact that there also actually is a connection. Anyway, there are this mining of our traditional heritage going on. Cool. So how to bring this whole thing and these whole complex of thoughts and stuff, how to bring that into concrete ceremony. And here's where I'd like, encourage you all to think with me a little bit. How do we call on that? Well, I'm afraid to use the word red pill, but that awakening, that realization of the own logic that our social systems are predicated on. How do we call on the realization of the relational crisis in order to stop healing it? How do we, invoke those powers that would exactly make us good ancestors? And when I spoke to Johan Hegg there from Amor Amarth, his wife Maria, they had this awesome idea. Maria, she had this awesome idea that of people sacrificing some of themselves by renouncing some of that life comfort that depends on those destructive patterns. Perhaps some will say, and this is just an example, I will become a vegan, or perhaps just I will never eat meat on Thursdays, or I will only eat meat that I've participated in killing myself, something like that. They could. Now, this is just meat eating as an example. It could be a lot of other stuff too. I eat meat myself, by the way. I also spoke to. I then spoke to Matthias Nordvik actually about this idea, and we got the idea of, and this is just like us kind of, spitballing together. We got the idea of perhaps making oath-taking rituals in that connect, and using, for instance, the Rune. You can take oaths to do this or that under the Rune, perhaps. And I have a video that explains exactly why this bind rune represents the Rune year. Another suggestion has been festivals and gatherings that take up the Rune theme. So the American rock festival, Fire in the Mountains, Matthias is telling me that they're sort of considering to have an Rune theme in 2023. And if they act on it, and actually make it an Rune theme, then dang, we should go to Fire in the Mountains. I really hope that other festivals will also take up the mantle here, even though this does imply a little bit of a social criticism. Another thing is, like, I've just suggested the idea of pilgrimages, like the Hindu Kumbh Mela here, perhaps on the actual dates in Leiden and Uppsala, on the 6th of January in Leiden and on the 6th of March in Uppsala. These are the dates of the historical Rune celebrations for next year. I want to myself try to set up some sort of ritual with some music in Leire on January 6th, which will then work as an opening of the Aun year. But the question is also, what exactly needs to happen? And I really want to encourage people to use their imagination and just think with this and sort of get active in making it happen, because I just threw out this idea, hey, let's have an Aun year, but then afterwards I discovered, oh shit, what to actually do about it. That's actually something that we need to figure out, and you are as good as me at figuring this out. It's not, I don't have kind of the final idea about what can happen. So yeah, I think we need to, if we want this to happen, then we need to get involved in it and think with it and think with the stories. There's a lot of stories that talk about relation and breaks on relation. In one old Norwegian tale, a woman recovers her lost relation by traveling into the other world and remaking the relation to her bear spouse, right? This is a story with a happy ending. Perhaps some stuff in there can be brought into ritual somehow. In a Danish story, a woman heals her relation to this monstrous prince by taking him through actually some sort of masochist bedchamber torture, where she's gradually unveiling her naked body and then forcing him to shed his serpent hides. And then she ends up whipping him into a bleeding lump of meat, and then she can marry. He becomes available to become a human. And I think it's a really powerful ritual sort of suggestion in there, actually. I got this image from a fairy tale book, by the way, that I got from my grandparents when I was about 8 years old. But funnily enough, I've tried to share it on Facebook in groups with the self-designated witches. I thought this initiatory female sexual power, it had to be their thing, but I actually found it controversial, which is also a little bit of a weird sign of our times, that I don't really know how to make out of it. That my sweet and church-going grandparents would give an 8-year-old something that is basically so witch-like that people who fancy themselves witches actually find it offensively sexual. Anyway, another example of this is that there's actually a quite wonderful parallel to this particular story in ritual from my friend, the Swedish scholar Olle Møllervand, who is working on bear totem relating in Härjedalen, where he's from in northern Sweden. And these people would actually ritually hunt and then ritually skin a bridegroom that has been masked as a bear in order to create a human for marriage out of him. And that's kind of a ritual relation making of sort. So perhaps, people can work with stuff like that and pull out, useful stuff, So yeah, this is just my thoughts. I hope it was made sense and was coherent. And I would like to just hear if you guys want to come with some input, or what you basically think about this whole crazy thing, how to ritualize, how to bring a contemporary, meaningful calling on healing of our relational crisis through this Aun celebration. Cool. That was what I had. Thanks a lot. And as I said, I think it would be really cool if we could have a little bit of dialogue about it.
Thank you, Rune. That was fascinating. So, people, do we have some questions for Rune?
Yes. Hi, you hear me?
Hey.
Hey, Rune. You see, I've gone through a little bit of a name change.
Yeah.
AKA Tanya. First question, I heard the date 6th of March. So these are 2 dates that historically it has landed on. Did I hear it right?
Yes. Do you want to explain why it's 2 dates? these 2 dates? Really good question. First, there are 2 chroniclers who talk about this this octennial celebration in the Viking Age: Tidmar of Merseburg and Adam of Bremen. Tidmar of Merseburg talks about it in Leyde in Zealand and Adam of Bremen in Uppsala. The celebration that Tidmar talks about in Leyde took place on exactly the 6th of January, because that was the what's it called in English? I think it's called King's Day, Three Kings Day. And so we can actually see that it took place on that date, but it is actually a moon phase that marks the date. And in 2023, it lands on the 6th of January, as it did in Tidmar's time. But the celebration in Sweden was described by Adam of Bremen was somewhat later in the spring. It was around the time of the vernal equinox. So I basically built on the amazing Swedish scholar Andreas Norberg's reading of these datings and so on, and the moon phase that marks the celebration in Sweden is March 6. However, our idea about doing this has also been to expand it a little bit, to say we have a year of Arm. We need to open up a little bit, also in order to inspire what actually it makes sense for people to do today. So we're actually thinking about it a little bit as a general theme that people can work with throughout the year of 2023. A little bit like you have Black History Month or something like that. We're thinking, let's have a year of healing. And this has very much sort of like, for instance, the thoughts that I'm presenting to you now, they've very much emerged through dialogues with people. In the beginning, we didn't even, I didn't know what it was about. I just know that this dating made sense and people kind of could see that. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does, and it's very inspiring, and it gives me a lot to work with here. And the 6th of January in Iceland is called the 13th here, and it's where the wild, like we could say, the wild hunt, and all the spirits are going back. So we already do ritual on that day. So having that on the year of On is quite intense and cool. And also I get some leeway to think about what do we want to work with the fall, where we usually do big sacrifices. But this is in regards to relation, connection, a long oath, like a commitment, 8 years. I think this is very important for, it can be very important for humans today, to give back, to get that balance back. And my plan is to, because some of the sacrifices I have here, it's pretty close, it's not public, especially during COVID years, but opening it up and giving the people an opportunity to step in. That is where I'm working from right now. And thank you so much for this talk. It's very inspirational and clarifying these dates. And I will definitely utilize the year.
Totally awesome, and it's really awesome to hear. And I think combining with stuff like the 13th day Yule, we also have this date in Scandinavia. I think it's called Three Kings in English. I think working with traditions on that is a really good idea, because there's some really intense ritual, for instance, ritual masking and stuff like that going on traditionally on that date. And it just so happens in 2023 that the Heathen Yule, the Yule moon, falls on that date, and that's why it falls close to the winter solstice. So yeah.
Goosebumps. That gives me goosebumps. We have the masking and the bonfires anyway, so we'll just amp it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so
Cool.
much, Rune.
You're welcome.
I have a hand up from Karina Backstrom. Karina?
Yes, good afternoon, Rune, and thank you so much for speaking for us. And I had so many thoughts when you were talking. My understanding from what you were saying is that we need to take this year and try to do some healing of the earth. I think that was your general idea, but I've also been thinking, it just seems like it might also be a good year. I'm seeing so many people jumping on next year as the on year and beginning to talk about it. And I think that in our communities, I think that's largely happening because of you. I noticed this year that foreign said sparage, I could be wrong on this, but it seems to me, from what I understand, that over maybe the last year or so, they've adopted your way of dating calendars and stuff. And it seems like a lot of organizations are starting to do that. And it just seems to me that healing the earth in 1 year, if that's what we're talking about, I think we should all try to do that, but it's also a very, very big, that's a pretty, I'm not saying it's grandiose. I'm not sure we can do it in a year, but healing heathenry though, I think that since everybody is beginning to get excited about on year, and I think that you've had a lot to do with that, I think that is also a very, very valid and worthy goal for this year. And another thing is that there's a few women in here that also moderate other Facebook groups and that sort of thing and seem to have some influence. And I'm thinking that we all need to maybe try to work together a little bit and get messages out a little bit more in a more not organized fashion exactly, but just kind of working together and maybe establishing some goals that we can all help each other out. And there was one last thing. I'm just gonna spit this out really quick. You know, I have a different idea about on year and on. And I could be totally wrong, but my reading of the story is that the sacrifices were okay at first because the king did these terrible is not the right word, but he did these very deep sacrifices of something very, very important to him to keep his relationship with the land and to keep his kingship because things were going well. And then he got kind of greedy and got selfish at the end. And that's when he got really sick and was laying in bed crapping on himself and stuff. And that's kind of my interpretation of On and the On stories, that making a sacrifice for the greater good, the gods might help us out. But when we're doing it just to be selfish, it's not going to work anymore. But I'm just throwing that out there. Thanks so much for speaking for us. We all really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for this. I totally think like stuff like the last thing you said about these the sacrifice. I think that, well, I mainly read it as a cautionary tale. However, I think it's really important that these kind of myths keep their multiple meanings, that you can read multiple meanings into them. Like I try to, read the Aun myth from the perspective of the Matrix mythology, right? And that kind of creativity and is, I think, really important in doing it. I also think your idea of connecting between heathen groups and stuff like that, I think is a really good idea. My personal inclination goes actually to look out of, for instance, heathenry, but that's just my thing. For me, the perfect thing would be if the Glastonbury Festival would make an Aun theme in 2023, right? Because then it moves out of sort of those mirror cabinets and enclosed spaces where, for instance, people are working to recover Nordic religion. But that's just my inclination. And I think that this particular thing, I think it has a bit of a potential to become sort of a general thing, something that you don't necessarily have to be super heathen in order to appreciate, that the impulse, right? And I also think that healing the world in 2023, we're probably not going to succeed, but we can call on that healing. We can call on that healing, and we can, and I think that is also super important, yeah. Oh, now I'm just going into the dialogue as if I was being asked something. Maybe people should link a little bit more so I don't speak too much.
Thank you, Rune. We have another hand up. Jess.
Hi, Rune. I was wondering, I totally am with you on this idea of like mirror cabinets and people having their own really, their own reality that's very separate from our collective reality. And I'm wondering if you came across any myths or rituals or charms around helping to break this kind of, this really powerful spell of delusion, this idea that the earth can be sick and in peril, and we can be fine if we just switch to electric cars. Like, how do we break this wider spell of delusion that feeds the loneliness that so many people feel? I know that's a big question, but I was just wondering if in your research you came across anything like that.
No. I think that when you encounter people who are, for instance, encased in really delusional shit, which you sometimes do, I have experienced that it is functional to, and it's a difficult question. Sometimes it's a little bit like when to cancel and when not to cancel, right? But sometimes it can actually work to make social space available for these people and enter into dialogue with them. Sometimes probably totally not. In generally, you can't save people, but some people actually want to move, and some people even perhaps want to be saved. Hallelujah! But also, I think with regards to the wider patterns of healing. Well, as you can hear, I'm a pretty idiosyncratic person myself. Like, yeah, consumerism is evil. But I think actually in some ways it's a part of it is probably also to step out of our preconceived ideas of how what the healing is necessarily going to look like. I know this might be controversial. I don't have a strong opinion about it myself, but I know very, very knowledgeable eco-activist debaters who strongly believe that we should all go nuclear power as soon as possible because, well, reasons. I'm not. I was a bit surprised when I heard that idea the first time. I know there's a lot of people who strongly do not believe that. But I think that's at least some level of sort of being prepared to listen to stuff like that, stuff that might, really rub, my own idiosyncrasies the wrong way, is probably important. And this also has to do with stuff like, I think, nostalgia and ideas of the past as necessarily ideal. I think stuff like, for instance, Nordic animism, really important that it doesn't become this sort of nostalgic thing where we're kind of worshipping an age where people had, folk costumes and played violins all the time, this kind of thing, but that it sort of becomes something that actually fits our spaces, which in many of our cases are urban spaces. I also know very knowledgeable people about when it comes to stuff like sustainability, who says, well, all human beings should just move into cities as soon as possible. That will give some space for biodiversity. If we all move to the countryside and start growing cabbage, as most of us dream about doing, myself included, then there won't be a butterfly left on the planet, because everywhere there will be an ecologic cabbage farmer. So this is, again, is something that's kind of goes against the ideas that we would tend to expect or would like to see. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for your insights.
And we have a question on the chat room from Kirsten Lovett, who's saying, what the Aun story made me think of was our capitalist society of extraction and using both the earth and people for fuel can no longer be sustained. Do you feel this is in line with the Aun message from an animist perspective?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think extraction, that our consumerist society is extraction based. That is part of the core root of it. That we are at our root, we are so destructive. When all these kind of for instance, the technology that we have, it represents an insane level of human capacity and technology, but we buy a new smartphone and throw it out 2 years later. We have this insane consumption patterns, and this is of course rooted in capitalism.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Rune?
Yeah, I don't know how to wave my hand on this program, but so hi. One thing I know from experience of creating space for ritual or, for ceremony, that when you prepare it and when it happens, we have also created space for spirit, whether it's our own or the higher spirit. And there's so much mechanism that works within that. And most people that I've joined in ceremony with, they find it quite grounding, that it clears things up, gives them clarity, perspective. And, like when people are kind of like offshoot, like we're unreal or anything like that, then when we create this opportunity, things get grounded again. And we also are meeting and doing this as community. And there's this something that just happens within the people that show up around the fire or around the ritual that can be quite grounding. And part of, what we really want to do is maybe save our reputation on Earth as human beings and creatures. I think the Earth will do fine without us. But when we do gather and make this kind of sacrifice and reconnection, it will affect like what kind of choices we make automatically, I think. So we just kind of like let the ceremony do the work too, and absorb what kind of comes through spirit and through the spirit of the community. I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. And I also think that also, I think it also has to do a little bit with the idea of trying to reach into the wider public, like this vision of man, if the Burning Man in 2023 or the Glastonbury, if they would make an own theme, or the Roskilde Festival even, probably too conservative for that, but then that would it would be a huge sort of it would be propelling that way of thinking, and it would actually bring it into ceremony, not only in the very concrete sort of ritual way that I sense that you were talking about here. It's Isval, right? When we met in Iceland, it was Tanya. Okay. Yeah. But also that I mean, it would really sort of write into our culture at a very foundational level that this logic is there to be addressed, and I think that would be in itself really, really healing, actually.
Yes. And being a witness. Witnesses of ceremony it can be very important if it's that way, And just that witness, you never know what really that does to the mentality of people. Just being able to see this happen, like what we witness can move emotions, move our awareness. Just as we are witness of other ceremonies from other traditions around the world, it moves us. So I like really like, that's why I want to open it up too, make it public, put it in the newspapers, it's like a work of art,
Yeah.
I like this idea of sculpture,
Yeah.
So it is something fascinating. So what does it mean? Then that will take on a life of its own maybe for the next 8 years.
Yeah, and I also think art is like when art kind of work with popularism, actually reaching broad populations, but also with activism at the same time, can be so powerful. No, I don't want to start talking about giving you examples about this because there are other people who want to say something. But
and we have 2 people waiting with questions. So if we go to Linda Haggerston next.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm trying to put my hand down here before I start. Yeah, okay. I do a lot of interfaith work, and I am an animist. I'm a druid. And my question is around how to bring people together. I do know examples of this, and it's sort of prion, if you like, what's happening. But I want to do something more locally. My accent gives you the wrong impression. I'm actually in Scotland. And I'm very interested in trying to bring people together. It's not easy. I find things to be very insular, or I should say groups to be very insular or familial, or there's a lot of individualism. It can be difficult, not impossible, but difficult. So how do you bring people together is kind of, what I need to, one thing I need to know. The other one is that down in Cornwall, a friend of mine is bringing over a group of elders from Canada, First Nations elders, including Two-Spirit people, and they're conducting for July and August, July through September, they're conducting rituals in different locations. Other people involved are Cornish and Scottish and English, and I don't know what else, from different backgrounds coming together for these rituals to heal relationships with each other across oceans and continents, and with the other beings around us, be they flora or fauna or other beings, and to heal the earth and to heal our souls as well. So that's a big ask. That's something amazing that is happening. And I'm not going to look at things on that scale. But again, for people who sort of lost the connection, how do you bring that back when there's so much to divide us? Yeah, that's a big question. Thank you.
Let me just have one clarification. When you're talking about bringing people together in Scotland, and you mentioned that you are into Druidry, are you talking about, for instance, people like Celtic oriented and Germanic oriented pagans, heathens? Is that the kind of people you're talking about bringing together?
It doesn't necessarily have to be from one particular group, although I think that's a good start to bring groups of pagans together, groups of druids together, but it could be interfaith groupings as well.
Cool. Well, I don't have a final answer to that question, but it's really important. It's really bloody important. And I think when we talk about different groups of say traditional religiosities, for instance, in Northern Europe, I think it's important to start thinking it actually kind of trans-ethnically, because at least if you think with animism, because animism is about relating to space and the features of those spaces. And you can see this, for instance, in Scandinavia, when in Ole Møllevan's area there in Härjedalen in Sweden, bear is an important relation. So Swedish-speaking Härjedalingar, or whatever they call it, they have this relation. If you are Skogsfinn or Sami, you have the same relation. It's because they're relating to bear, and there might be kind of cultural differences in between what exactly they do about it, but there's certainly also cultural similarities. And we have a little bit that tradition of thinking our traditional knowledge from this culturalist perspective. It is kind of, there is a culture, and that is sort of the unit that defines it. But I think we need to move into more of a mode of thinking it from a more relational perspective. It's about, there is perhaps a culturalist aspect. We're bringing some culture with us. So if we're living in Arizona today as a diaspora Eurocenters, we have some baggage with us. But the important part is also to look at the relation to specific landscapes. So I would say, like, if you have a place like Scotland that has both Celtic and Germanic and Nordic also kind of traditions that have sort of gone into that kettle in order to produce the people there, I would say this is a way of relating to landscape, and it's documented from kind of a specific corner in Northern Europe. But if it is a way of relating to landscape, and it's a way of relating to the shifting cycles of light and how they align and realign. So I think it should, in that sense, it ought to make sense in all of the Northern Hemisphere. And let me just say about the initiative that you were talking about of bringing over Indigenous elders to, was it England, to do some healing ceremonies there?
Cornwall, yeah.
Cornwall, yeah. Sorry to Cornish people there. I think that's awesome. And I think that stuff like that, if stuff like that could be merged in with our ritual or our narrative, I think it would be perfect. There's a Native American activist, eco-activist called Winona LaDuke, who wrote a book with a wonderful title or the wonderful subtitles, The Wendigo Slayers. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the Anishinaabe right here, but Wendigo is some sort of vampire being. So she's talking about being an eco-activist as being a Wendigo slayer, vampire slayer, you know. and she's talking about this age of the Wendigo, people who are sucking the life out of the world, basically, and that aligns so incredibly well with the myth and narrative of the Aon logic. And I think that working these things together, working lines between these things, would be a really, really productive thing. Also because it sort of points towards wider public. You know, it would be something that would be interesting for the wider public, and it would move this idea of relating people, for instance, across oceans. It would bring it into the actual cultural level, where it's not just us being like pastel colored white people who are sitting and sort of idealizing of going, wow, about how cool it is to be a Native American, but it would actually create a relation. You know, it would actually bring that relation into being. I would actually, if you want to give me contact with these people, I would like to perhaps write them or something like that and just pitch it. But also, if you have contact with them, you're welcome to do yourself. I just want to shoot that out there. Thanks.
Karina has got her hand up. Karina,
I know
if
that
you're
we've
very
got like a
quick.
minute. Yeah, super quick. I just would like to have like some kind of central place, maybe here at HWU, where we could check in from time to time about this. Maybe work a little bit. Like I'd like to know what I'd like to do some stuff in my local area with newspapers and I, you know, friends that do music and stuff like that. But I'm just kind of wondering if there'd be a place that I could kind of check in to figure out what the message is I would be trying to get across. And also maybe like a little cheerleading if we're so that we don't feel like we're just kind of individuals out in the dark, shouting out in the dark. It would be kind of nice. But anyway, that was my only point. Thanks everybody.
Cool. Yeah, I actually at some point made a Facebook group about it, but I forgot the fact that many heathens are very dysfunctional in communicating with each other. So people started fighting immediately, and I actually closed it down because I wasn't really sure if it would basically be destructive to have it open. but I think that is a really good idea to have context about this. And let me mention another thing, by the way. Now I mentioned Leida and Uppsala here. That's just two places that I meant. The foundational idea is that people congregate at regional centers. So if you are in North America or in Britain, there will be regional centers of importance over there where it will make sense to congregate, or even new regional centers can emerge. But yeah, I think I should probably stop talking now. Somebody else is.
Thank you so much, Rune. It's been fascinating.
Thanks.
And obviously, every big journey starts with a single step. So let's all hope that we can start making those individual steps, whatever they are, to making next year extra special, focusing on our relationships and healing things where we can. And I'm sure there'll be more discussion in a lot of different areas. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here again.
Thanks, Rune.
So I'm now going to hand over the hosting to Olivia.